Hi, welcome to Season 1, Episode 10 of Impact Effectively. I'm Florence Madden. I'm a management development trainer, an NLP trainer and coach based in Cumbria in the north of England. I'm the co-author of Everyday NLP and the author of The Intention Impact Conundrum, on which this series of podcasts is based. The book, incidentally, is in turn based on a course that I run regularly in the Lake District, Personal Effectiveness at Work. So through this series, I've been looking at how we understand the impact that we have, and if it's not what's serving us, what we can do about it. So looking at beliefs, looking at language, and seeing things from other people's viewpoint. And in this last podcast of this series, which I've entitled Growth or Fixed, Your Choice, I am looking at mindset. So maybe a good place to start would be to explain what's the difference between a belief and a mindset. Well, a belief is something that we hold to be true, whether we've got evidence of it or not. And mindset is something a bit broader. It is a collection of thoughts and indeed beliefs and perhaps decisions that we've made about ourselves that form a frame through which we look at life and certainly look at ourselves. And the work on mindset is attributed to the psychologist Carol Dweck, who put forward this idea that we have growth mindsets and we have fixed mindsets. If we have a growth mindset, it sees that our capabilities, our talents are fluid and developable, but there isn't necessarily a ceiling on what we can achieve, and things are up for development. In contrast, if we have a fixed mindset, we see ourselves and probably other people as having limits to our talents and our capabilities, what we're able to achieve, whether that's physically or whether it's in mentally or academically. And Carol Dweck's work actually brings to mind a quote from Wolfgang von Goethe, which is one that I particularly like. And that is, if you treat an individual as he is, he will remain how he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. And Carol Dweck's view on mindset is pretty much that. Whether it's how we view other people or specifically how we look at ourselves, when we open up the possibilities, when we remove the limitations, then we can achieve so much more. Way before Carol Dweck's work, Robert Rosenthal, back in the 1960s, came up with this idea of the Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion in Greek mythology was a sculptor who sculpted a beautiful woman out of ivory and fell in love with her. And the gods granted him his wish of making her into a real person. And the idea emerges from that if you want something enough, if you believe in something enough, then you can make it real. And Robert Rosenthal observed that whatever expectations we place on ourselves or on others, there is a tendency to meet those. So if our expectations are low, for example, of a child, then that may well limit what they achieve. And conversely so, when our expectations of them are higher, then they tend to achieve more. I suppose when we look at how we influence another person or indeed a child, when we have those expectations, inevitably we must be speaking to them and treating them differently. But that, of course, can apply to ourselves as well. What is our self-talk? How are we thinking and speaking to ourselves? Now, Carol Dweck's work has its critics because people have said, well, you know, a growth mindset, does that mean everybody can be a Mozart or a Van Gogh or something like that? Well, probably not. But if our expectations of ourselves, if our belief in ourselves, our beliefs in ourselves are increased, then there does seem to be good evidence that that can actually improve performance. Does it mean we can achieve everything? No, probably not, but more than we actually thought. And a good example of this is the 4-minute mile and Roger Bannister's achievement of that back in 1964. Prior to that, it was kind of a bit of a barrier, and people believed that humans weren't actually capable of doing that. Some other people in the know thought, well, maybe they are capable of doing that, but only in a certain set of conditions. And it's kind of interesting because when Roger Bannister did achieve the 4-minute mile back in May 1964, the conditions, as I understand it, were far from perfect, but he did it anyway. But what's really interesting is what happened after that. Having believed that 4-minute mile was an unattainable barrier for such a long time, once it was broken, within a couple of months, someone else had broken it even further and had an even better time than Roger Bannister. And in the time, in the decades that have followed, something like 1,500 people have bettered that limit and have consistently shaved more and more time off that mile. So there is something about what Roger Bannister did, what he achieved, changed people's belief about what was possible, and they were able to achieve more. I actually have some personal experience of this, and I suppose fixed mindsets that I had about myself. And it taught me something about the value of having a go. A number of years back, I was at a New Year party and somebody challenged me to run 3 miles. I do have to tell you that at school, I was definitely in the unsporty category and would have been the person who would have looked to avoid anything like that. But in the spirit, and literally the spirit of that evening, I took on that challenge. And a few days later, the person that actually laid down that challenge turned up at my door to get me to make good on it. And I ran from my house at that time to another point 3 miles away. Now, when I got there, I was certainly not in good form. I probably could have done with a bit of an oxygen tank, but I did it. And that started to change my belief about myself. So that first 3 mile run was done on something like the 3rd or 4th of January. And in April of that year, I ran my first half marathon. So once we break through the belief barriers, once we take on this growth mindset, it's amazing what we can achieve. And similarly, when it came to writing books, for a number of years, various delegates have said to me over the years, you should write this stuff down. And my reply was pretty much the same in all cases, which is, I'm not the sort of person that writes books. Now, how's that for a fixed mindset? Who's the sort of person that writes books? And then I decided to have a go. and kind of took the view that it actually didn't matter whether the book was ever published or not, but I would have broken some barrier for myself by simply writing it. Of course, the book has been published, and as I say, it's what this series of podcasts is based on. But both of those are timely reminders to me of how easy it is to have a fixed mindset, a fixed view of what I personally am capable of, but also the value of having a go and just seeing what actually can be achieved. So, do I think that everybody can be a Mozart, an Olympic swimmer, you know, a brilliant artist? Possibly not. But I do think when we take more of that growth mindset attitude, there's an awful lot more that we can achieve. So I want to finish this podcast, and indeed this season of podcasts, on a quote from William Shakespeare, who said, "It is not the stars that hold our destiny, but in ourselves." So thank you for watching or listening to this podcast, and indeed any of the others that you've been listening to as well. You can find out more about my other series of podcasts, Everyday NLP Bites, also about the courses I run and the other services that I offer on my website, which is www.florencemadden.co.uk. So once again, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast, and I hope you'll join me for the next season when that comes along. In the meantime, I'd love to have your feedback, and I would love to hear from you. And to say all of that is available through my website. So bye for now.